So we're going to make each of these factorable, and specifically I'm going to be looking to make them factorable as perfect squares. So in other words, I want to be able to turn into something where I have x plus or minus some number squared down here. Now we had a specific pattern, and it's the pattern that we were using yesterday to do some of these problems. What do I do to the 10? You said square, but there's actually something before we do the squaring of it. We have to divide it by 2. So what's 10 divided by 2? 5, okay? So what's 5 squared? 25. And so then that's our answer, because that 5 that I got from dividing the middle number by 2, remember that if I start with something that looks like this, x plus 5 squared, and I want to multiply it out, the number that's on the inside, in this case the 5, that times 2 gives me the middle number, and that number squared equals the last number. All right, so as we take a look at the second one then, x squared minus 6x plus what? Well, again, it's going to have to factor into something that would be x plus or minus some number squared. And so I wanted to know what that number is, so I take my middle number and I divide it by 2. And so that's going to be negative 3. Since it's a negative 6, I make it a negative 3. Now what's negative 3 squared? 9. And so my blank then, to fill it in with, is 9. And it's a matter of figuring out, what do I make that blank? What do I make that last term that's going to be the key to being able to do this stuff tomorrow when we're solving using this? But again, right now we're kind of laying a foundation. We're building up some skills so that tomorrow's work is going to be a lot easier when we get there. But of course I want to practice this just a little bit more. So here's 2 more problems, and for each one I want you to fill in the blank to make it a perfect square trinomial, but also please write it in factored form. All right, so for that first one, we divide the middle number by 2. So 18 divided by 2 is 9. 9 squared is 81. And so then that means I'd fill in the blank with an 81. Now that was the first part. Fill in the blank to make the trinomial into a perfect square. It's now a perfect square, but since it's a perfect square, that means I can factor it. And so the second part, writing it in factored form, that means I'm going to turn that expression that I just wrote into x plus or minus some number squared. And that number, remember, is the same one I got when I divided the middle number by 2. And so in this case, it is the 9. Positive 9, so make it a plus 9. All right, now for the last one, we go through the same process. Take the middle number and divide it by 2. That gives us negative 10. What's negative 10 squared? 100. Therefore, that needs to be the last number. And so now we go ahead and we go to that second part where I need to write it into factored form. And so that's going to have to be x plus or minus some number squared. And again, to know that number, it's whatever I got when I divided that middle one by 2. So negative 20 by 2 was the negative 10. So it's x minus 10 squared. And again, notice that pattern. Negative 10 times 2 is negative 20. Negative 10 squared is 100. It follows that pattern, so that's why I know it can actually turn into that. All right, so for these, for the first one, you should be filling the blank with 49. And when we write it in factored form, that should be x minus 7 squared. Now, if you're unsure how to get the 49, I started by figuring out that negative 14 divided by 2 was the negative 7. And then I squared the negative 7 to get the 49. Same process on the second one. So in this last one, that blank needs to be filled in with just a 1. Because I do 2 divided by 2 which is just 1, so x plus 1 squared. And 1 squared, of course, that is 1 times itself, gives us the 1 here. That's how we knew the blank.